Hi, everybody. We're going to get going. I know people are coming in from lunch, but we like to maximize our time. Paola Antonelli, who you're going to hear from today, is a remarkable thinker about design. She is the senior curator of the Department of Architecture and Design at the Museum of Modern Art. How many of you have gone to MoMA in the last few years? Okay. Everything in design and architecture is under Paola's purview there. She's been there since, I'm sorry? Speaking to my, sorry. She's been there since 1994. Paola has been helping me with the design track, which you're in the middle of. And so she's somebody that I turn to say, who do we want to have come talk about what's really innovative in design? And a number of the presenters that are weaving in through this half of the track have been people that she has recommended to us, and I'm just really thrilled to introduce her. She's a friend of the Institute. She's a great friend to me in all the help that she's given me, and she's a brilliant thinker about design. So I'm very glad to introduce to you Paola Antonelli.
Love you. Love you too. Thank you so much. And I was going to complain to Kitty that she put some unfair competition on the schedule. At 1 o'clock, there's a panel, and Tom Campbell is going to be interviewed at the same time. But I understand there's peach cobbler outside, and that's much more unfair. I'm very, very happy to be here in Aspen because my whole career in the United States started in Aspen with the Aspen Design Conference, where I was working as a little girl, not so little, but I'm going to pretend here, in 1989. And at that time, it was a conference about Italy, design in Italy, and I was here as the Italy coordinator, but there was an audiovisuals guy from LA that I decided I had a crush on. So I started going to Los Angeles to stalk the poor guy, and nothing ever happened with him, but I started teaching at UCLA, and from that came my whole career. I ended up at MoMA. So in a way, Aspen is the beginning for me, and it's also the culmination of so much that we all know about design. I don't know if you know, but this city really has a design tradition like no other, because Walter Paepke from Container Corporation decided to fund the International Design Conference in Aspen together with a bunch of amazing designers in 1951 with the idea of making industrialists and great designers meet, and therefore improving not only industrial products, but in a way, our life. And from Aspen and LA, I ended up at MoMA, where, as Kitty told you, I've been for way too long, 19 years. But what we tried to do at MoMA when I started with my team was to expand the idea of design. And the designers that you've met here in these past few days, some of them are apparently traditional, but in truth, none is, because design has fundamentally changed in the past few decades, and not only because of the computer, also because of how we have changed. And that's what I would like to talk about with you today, the new frontiers of design. Just to go back a few milestones of what I tried to do, personal milestones for what I tried to do at MoMA, and an explanation of what it means to try and expand the idea of design. The first exhibition that I did was about materials. It was called Mutant Materials in Contemporary Design. And I wanted to explain to the audiences at MoMA that all the different ingredients of the design process contribute towards a brand new idea. And these were all objects that were made using innovative materials or using traditional materials in an innovative way. After that, many exhibitions came, but the one that is probably the most interesting for me to discuss with you is Design and the Elastic Mind, which was in 2008. And at that time, we decided to try and test something new, which was to put together designers and scientists, not only in an exhibition, but also in salons, in public talks, and see what happened if we eliminated the membrane of technology. You know, usually what happens in the world is that engineers or scientists make revolutions. You know, they find new materials, they invent new technologies, but without designers, these revolutions would never become reality. They would never become life. If you think about it, the internet at the beginning was lines of code. So only if you were part of DARPA or military, academic, programmer, only if you were part of the closed circle did you know how to digit the lines of code in order to use the internet. But then the designers of Mosaic came, the first interface that could be used by everybody, They introduced buttons and hyperlinks and windows, and all of a sudden my grandmother could use the internet. The same with microwave ovens. I mean, think about all of the amazing innovations you have in your life. Designers are the trait d'union, the link between great ideas and life. Therefore, innovation is metabolized and happens by means of design. And that's what we were trying to prove and to show by putting science and design together in an exhibition. When I say we, it's because it's always huge teams. But lately, we've tried to expand even more the idea of design to include a lot of digital artifacts. We started out with digital fonts. There was an exhibition of the new entries in the collection. We started with acquiring 23 digital fonts. And then we moved on to more interaction design. And if any of you has the time, actually, I'm not even going to say, go listen to Tom Campbell. Don't come to my panel. But at 1 o'clock, we're going to talk about interactive design and digital design. But we started acquiring the kind of design that is completely immaterial, and the real acquisition is the code, in a way. These are reactive books by John Maida. I know that this audience is very familiar with John's great work, and they are installed in the collection galleries at MoMA. And, Talk to Me, I cannot focus. I was able to stop on that. Talk to Me was an exhibition that celebrated all this idea of digital design, and in particular, it celebrated the fact that we've come to expect objects to communicate with us. Probably many of you have seen that issue of The Atlantic with the kids on the cover, you know, the touchscreen generation. That's what I'm talking about. We have an expectations of objects not only to have a rapport with us, that's happened for centuries, but actually to have a conversation with us today. And that's what many designers are working on, that conversation, the kind of behavior and exchange that happens between human beings and what is not anymore a machine, but rather a companion or a series of companions. More recently, we've started acquiring video games. Okay, oops. I have a hard time clicking the right way. We started acquiring video games, and we have installed them in our collection along with furniture, along with other examples of design, because the idea is that, once again, the kind of design that happens when we human beings are in the space of the computer screen is interaction design. And in a way, video games are the most pure or isolated form of interaction design. We started out acquiring, you see, we have Pac-Man in the collection, we have Tetris, we have SimCity, The Sims, and several others, and we're continuing the conversation. So I'm not going to talk about these in particular today, although I'm happy to discuss it with you further later on, because the idea of acquiring video games is controversial and extremely interesting. But this is to show you that design today is so much more than what it used to be. It's not anymore just objects or chairs or cars or posters, but it's everything touchable and untouchable that is around us in the world. And what really has happened is that the old ideas about design are shifting. If you look at this beautiful slide, I really love this slide. This is by, I can walk in front of a slide. This is a slide that my friends Tony Dunn and Fiona Raby use a lot. Tony and Fiona are the fathers, the parents, not fathers, what am I talking about? The parents of critical design, which is a new but not new way of thinking about design, not as problem solving, but rather as problem making, as asking the right question. If you look on the left column, A, is design as we used to think about it. You know, design as problem solving, form follows function, all the cliches that you've heard so many times. And on the right-hand side is design as it is today, after it's been contaminated by our need to live in a more communal way, by our sense of responsibility towards the environment, all the good things that lead us to be more responsible towards each other and towards our world. So even though we could spend 2 hours on this slide alone, just take a look. Problem solving, once upon a time, today problem finding. Many designers are thinking of the possible consequences of our choices of today. And they're doing so in compelling ways, very communicable and really impressive. Or, you know, design that used to think of changing the world to suit us, and instead today, it's about changing us to suit the world. You see, there's a very strong, even though that phrase is unbearable, that term is unbearable, here is a real paradigm shift. It's a shift of the center of gravity, you know, that talks about going from being a consumer. That's one of my favorite ones. We used to talk about consumers. I cannot say the word consumer. I have like shivers down my spine. From consumer to citizen, or you can put something else there, you know, but it's not anymore about consuming. It's really about being part of the whole process. Design, indeed, is critical, and I'll show you many forms of design here, and they all can talk about each other and exchange the attributes. What's important to know also is that nothing is ever really new. And especially at MoMA that has a great tradition that is at the same time young, but also conscious of history, young because it was founded in 1929, we look to history very often to think about the present, although it's a shorter history. So when I talk about critical design, it's impossible not to think about the radical architects and designers of the 1960s, late 1960s and early 1970s. If you look at this beautiful slide by Superstudio, a group of Italian architects, and this is a slide from 1968, it's impossible also not to think of the mountains outside. It's a new way of thinking about our relationship with nature, being so diverse and alien that we almost don't touch each other. This was a few years before 2001: A Space Odyssey, but you can tell that distance is a way to create respect. And today, it's quite similar what happens, you know, but in a way, it's a little more intimate. This is the work of Dan and Raby, and I really like this work. It's called Foragers, and it's part of the MoMA collection. The idea is that I was telling you how they think about possible consequences. If we go on this way, in 50 years, we might run out of food for everybody. So we might have to go back to eating and digesting things that we haven't eaten and digested for centuries, like, you know, leaves and seaweeds and, you know, like roots. So Tony and Fiona are thinking of these kind of equipment that is outsourced gastrointestinal systems. So you wear them, and here you see some French students in the countryside near Bordeaux testing them. So you wear them, and they pre-digest leaves, or they pre-digest the kind of proboscis pre-digests algae, or they pre-digest roots, so that you actually can extract the nutrients from that. This is borderline art, you might tell me. And how do I distinguish at this point between design and art? Frankly, I don't. I believe what the author tells me. By the way they position themselves, in a way, is how I judge the object. And when people ask me what the difference is, this is a little parenthesis, but today it's kind of important to talk about it because there's no more distinction that is formal or medium-based. When people ask me what the difference is between an artist and a designer, I simply say that an artist can choose whether to act responsibly or to work for other people or not, while a designer has to do that by definition. It's almost as if designers took a Hippocratic oath when they decide to become designers. And even when they talk about dystopian scenarios, they're still doing so in an almost homeopathic way to kind of prevent future consequences from happening. So you have to think of critical design that way. So much of critical design is also activist, you know, but there's different types of activism today. There's a more overt activism. This is the work of Ralph Borland, who's a South African designer that studied at NYU. And this is also in the MoMA collection. It's called Suited for Subversion. It's this vest that you're supposed to wear when you are protesting. So it protects you from the batons of the police, of course, because it's all padded. And then it also has, you know, it has a camera above your head that films the whole action, so you can have a record of everything that happens. But the nicest touch is that it has a loudspeaker over your heart that amplifies your heartbeat, thus reminding the police that you're a human being. It's like the flower, you know, the flower to the cannon. But also you can imagine when hundreds of people are wearing it, it's a collective heartbeat that is almost threatening, you know, so it's like a multifunctional object. There's other forms of activism that are very poignant. This is an exercise that so many architectural students go through, which is to work for the homeless population of the city where they're studying. But this architect, who's not a student anymore, Cameron McNall, went a little further. He said, it's not only about giving shelters to the homeless people, it's also about changing the whole balance. So it's about changing something very important. Homeless people are often invisible. If the shelters are bright as can be and impossible to miss, there's going to be also an in-your-face quality for the whole intervention that is maybe a way to actually change the balance and the thought of the powers that be. One step further into this wonderful political activism is one of my favorite visualization design projects that is in the MoMA collection. Visualization design is about taking data sets and visualizing them so that people can understand them better. In this case, these designers from Columbia University, it's a special spatial information lab there, took data that are about the so-called $1 million blocks. The $1 million blocks are blocks in various cities in the United States where the government, whether local or federal, spends more than $1 million a year to either keep some of the inhabitants in prison or in halfway houses. So in a way, it's the cost of entropy. It's about how to keep people outside of societies as opposed to reintroducing them. And you know, there are 300 plus of these blocks in Brooklyn alone. So you can read this data in the newspaper in the morning and you can be shocked and outraged for 20 minutes, but then you forget it. Only when you see red over black, the blocks on a map of Brooklyn, does it really remain engraved in your memory? And does it really make an impression? So it's a way to communicate. You see that design is so much more than just pure normal function. It's also about conveying important information. And the amazing thing is that I told you this is in the collection. It's both static and also in video form. And the education department, actually the head of the education department of MoMA is here, Wendy Won, often brings in students, no, not students, how can I say it? You know, people, boys that are in halfway houses in Brooklyn, and you should see how they react when they see this in the MoMA halls. You know, they really think, oh my God, art is really also about me. It's a very important and moving experience to see what happens when you think of the real world, and so many artists, not only designers, are doing so. I don't know if any of you went to listen to Theaster Gates just a few minutes ago. So it's about communication, and design is about communication, and it's not only about touch screens, it's about communicating the whole complexity of the world. Okay, I really love this visualization design that's called BBC Dimensions, which enables one to take something that happened elsewhere in the world, say the floods in Afghanistan, in Pakistan a few years ago, and superimpose the event onto one's own home turf by entering the zip code. So all of a sudden, you realize that the area affected by the Gulf oil spill in 2010, if you go back to the tri-state area, is almost as big as from Atlantic City and out to Pennsylvania and all the way up to New York. Or you can notice that the Apollo 11 moon landing was a walk around the block. So all of a sudden, everything is into perspective. And that's the beauty of not only computation, but also about good design. When designers are good, they can really do it well. I like also when new types of design enable the communication not only between human beings or between human beings and objects, but also with your God, whatever God you are adoring. I really like these objects that were in the Talk to Me exhibition. On the left-hand side, you see the prayer companion that was developed by the students of the Goldsmiths University in London for a group of cloistered nuns in northern England. It's actually being used. We have a copy in the MoMA collection, but one is in use. It is an object, and please notice how sensitive the students were. They didn't do like a phantasmagoric or like futuristic design. It looks like an altar object. And it's a ticker tape that gives the nuns topics to pray about. It's connected to BBC News. And you know, the cloistered nuns are really cloistered, so they only get some Vatican newspapers that, as you can imagine, don't tell you much of what's going on for real. So the ticker tape gives them topics to pray about, and they actually gave an interview and said that it keeps their prayers pertinent. And I really love also El Sajada, which is a Muslim prayer mat that has an electroluminescent underlay and a compass module. So when it's turned in the right direction with Mecca, it lights up. Now, we all know where Mecca is. We don't really need it. But I think that this sign of subjugation of technology in front of faith is really delicate and really beautiful. And these are the objects that I care the most about. Extreme communication is something that I also love. This was one of my favorite objects in the Talk to Me exhibition. It was very controversial. It stirred a lot of reaction. It's a menstruation machine that is meant to let men experience having their period, the whole experience. It has electrodes, it's this kind of chastity belt. It has electrodes that come into the lower abdomen and give you cramps, with shocks, electrical shocks. It has a reservoir. You're supposed to draw your blood, put it there, and then it gets delivered in between your legs through cannules. It's the whole spiel. But at the same time, it's also beautiful, a beautiful object, and it is performed and explained by the designer herself. Her name is Sputniko. Hiromi Ozaki is actually her name, and she always does things this way. She starts with an object, then she creates a persona that wears and displays the object, and she embodies the persona. But also in Japan, she's a pop star, so she always also makes a little pop song with a YouTube video that becomes viral in 3 seconds. So if you type Sputniko menstruation machine, you can listen to the song in which Takashi, which is the persona, a boy, goes around town with his girlfriend, and the girlfriend sings, "It hurts, right? And it's gonna hurt even more." So it's this whole kind of performance about it. Why do I like it so much? Because there are some ultimate taboos, there are some ultimate barriers to communication, and in a way, menstruation is one. It's a barrier to understanding in normal couples, and it's a barrier to communication in some countries and in some religions. So I think that this kind of design has a lot of potential and is also quite moving. Thinkering is also a great way to think of design today. This is a word that was coined by John Seeley Brown that was also here at the Ideas Festival, which means thinking with your hands, basically. And it's the revival of all the activities, the manual activities surrounding design that are part of maker culture, but it also manifests itself in the generosity with which designers experiment and then disseminate their ideas. I don't know how many of you have already heard about the iWriter project. It's from 2009, and it's quite well known, so you might have heard about it. But it's a beautiful project that started out with the desire to help a graffiti artist from LA that has become completely paralyzed because of Lou Gehrig's disease, and then was expanded in such a way as to make it available to anybody. The software is open source, the hardware can be built according to instructions with about $50, and it could empower anybody who has a complete paralysis with only the eyes moving to be able to write and to be able to communicate with a very, very small disbursement of money, while right now what's needed to do so is at least about $5,000 to $10,000. But at the very beginning, this project that was initiated by a group of programmers and artists that all centered around the I-Beam Institute in New York City was able to let Tempt One, the artist, tag a building in downtown LA with a laser technology from his hospital bed. And it was quite amazing. There's also a movie about it that really can make you understand the power of design. Of course, I'm showing you a lot of examples that are digital, that are all about new technology, but they could be completely analog. This is the work of Martino Gamper, who's an Italian designer living in London. It's 100 chairs in 100 days, and for 100 days he went around London, picked stuff in the street, and made a chair that day with what he found. So it's almost like a manifesto for reusing, for recycling, for creativity, for inventiveness. It's an exploration of the essence of a chair, and you know what, a chair is such a staple of design. It's one of the first ways for designers to confront themselves with the human body. So it's a multi-layered project that was inspiring to so many designers, younger designers that study with him. Once again, history gets repeated. Enzo Mari, who is an Italian designer now in his late 80s, did this thing called autoprogettazione, self-design, in 1974. Now, at that time, there was a different virulence and vehemence. Enzo, he's still alive today, is such a wonderful, fiery Marxist, even when Marxism almost is become a complete religion and not anymore a reality, he's still there. And the belief that he had in everybody being able to be a designer, which in a way has been revived today by maker culture, is something that he really strongly pushed at that time in history. Irony. Irony is a weapon that design uses at different times in history to make points that are really deep. I remember when, as a little Milanese girl, I was in Milan and Colors magazine came out first. At that time, it was funded by Benetton, and it was run by Tibor Kalman, the great art director and graphic designer from New York, and Oliviero Toscani, the fashion photographer. And he was really like a punch in the stomach. I remember I was outraged because I was like a little Milanese girl, so I was wearing my little skirt to go and buy milk. I had to be completely dressed up, and all of a sudden, here comes these gigantic billboards with this newborn baby. It was really like a shock. And I remember some other issues like the one with the Black Queen Elizabeth. We're talking about the early 80s. So it was really an amazing new form of communication that was more in your face than it had ever been. Now, of course, there's always this issue of what is sponsored and what is actually promoted by, but it was nonetheless really an example and a lesson in how things can be when you use irony. Sometimes irony is unintentional. For instance, these are green bullets that are actually developed by the government of the United States, by the military, and they're green because they have no lead, so they're not going to damage the environment, even though they'll kill you still, which is very important. And over there is the work of Revital Cohen. I like that piece of software, really little program that enables you to scratch your computer and make it bleed when it crashes all the time. So once again, a different form of interaction design that makes you think. Of course, sometimes the irony is almost too overt, like the do-hit chair that was developed by Drug Design several years ago. You get a block of, I don't remember if it was steel or aluminum, and a mallet, and you were supposed to form your chair into shape. But instead, when it's subtle, despite the shock value of the object, it's very powerful. This work by Andrew Friend is a lightning rod that enables you to get the whole brunt of a lightning without dying. So there's only enough insulation for you not to die, but you feel the whole thing. So it's about bringing us to the edge and making us really feel what it must be to be right before that fatal moment. Irony that is not necessarily spontaneous, but at the same time, it's kind of charged by the designer to convey the message. The collaboration between designers and scientists are really multiplying today, and I love this collaboration between Daisy Ginsberg and James King, that are two graduates of the Royal College of Art in London, and the young students of biology, and especially of synthetic biology, at the Cambridge University in England. Every year there's something called iGEM, which is a jamboree for genetically engineered machines that happens at MIT. And students participate, and in this case they participate jointly with these designers. And they created this way to re-engineer E. coli, the bacteria that, as you know, are our companions and live in our guts, so that they could react and change color depending on problems that we might have in our gastrointestinal system. To make a long story short, you take your E. chromai, the bioengineered E. coli, as a milkshake, and when they come into your gut, they react. You might have diverticulitis, gastritis, you name it. And then afterwards, when you go to the bathroom, you get your diagnostic tool. So the different colors would be the outcome. So it really is interesting because it's a real, it's a real experiment, and it really works, and it could become one of the possibilities for the future. I mean, in a way, when you measure your urine's pH, you do something similar. So I really like the fact that this collaboration is leading to new ideas that are at the same time very old. Politics is really important. And as a European that grew up in the 70s and 80s, I was taught that everything that is beyond the family nucleus is politics. I mean, sometimes you could argue that even within the family, you could do politics. But politics is omnipresent and pervasive. Design can be political and sometimes can do so in a stereotypical way. It's very funny. Sometimes designers revert to the beginning of the 20th century to almost constructivist kind of styles when they have to really protest. These are some of the posters that were issued in the occasion of Occupy Wall Street. They were quite gorgeous, but going back to a very old-fashioned style. But politics is always there, also when the poster is slightly different. And I like to always show this object, this interface, this website from 2004 by Josh On called They Rule. It was one of the first instances in which people saw the power of data visualization and the power of harnessing the capability of the internet. Josh took several boards, corporate boards of the in the United States, of big companies, and several committees on the government, and started finding all the connections, the people that sat on two boards, the people that were connected to the government, therefore creating this kind of beautiful fractal map of possible conflicts of interest. I mean, it's sometimes, it was a way to really unveil all of these connections that were previously impossible to understand unless one had really a hand-drawn map that showed them all. So it was one of the first ways, and you see how elegant it is. There's something really clean and really clear about this visualization design that made it even more pervasive and important. But another example of the political power of visualization design is this visualization that was made by Diller, Scofidio, Renfro, and many other artists and engineers for an exhibition in 2009 in Paris. It was an exhibition at the Fondation Cartier that was curated by Paul Virilio. Paul Virilio is one of these wonderful French intellectuals that are your greatest generalists, so they're able to talk about many different subjects. And in this case, the exhibition was about the idea that humanity today is defined by migrations, by great movement of people that are displaced either by political events or by natural events. So this visualization in a big round theater showed how people had been displaced from Rwanda to the tsunami in the Philippines. So all these different types of movements around the world. And also there was a second visualization that showed the remittances, so the movements of finances that were due to immigration all around the world. A fantastic piece that was shown then afterwards in the United States. It was shown at Rensselaer, at RPI. I know Shirley Ann Jackson was here and spoke to yesterday and talked about the amazing facilities that they have up in Troy, and it was shown there. If you ever have a chance to see it, it's quite fantastic. But first and foremost, what we're looking for in design today is a certain idea, a certain vision, a certain conviction. And this is something that also happened in the 1960s. Once again, I always want to show you some images of this really funny, what architects used to do at that time. So these are actually Hausrucker. They were architects in Vienna at the end of the 60s and beginning of the 70s. And they had invented this mind-expanding helmets. They were just models. They were not the real thing. But the way they described them was almost like describing the internet before it had happened. So by means of these helmets, there was a way to connect nodes, to expand information, to search, and to connect. So it was great how one object, one idea could be a catalyst for so many ideas for the future. And sometimes it happens when it is about science. Some science fiction design can truly predict. And I like how designers make efforts to try and explain to us concepts that otherwise would be unreachable. This designer, Anaib Jain, tried to prepare this performance camera that is supposed to show us the theory of the many universes. It's a theory that is at the basis of string theory and also of movies like Sliding Doors. We've seen, or Fringe. There's many movies that talk about parallel universes. But it's always difficult to try and visualize them at once. And instead, what Anaib did is she loaded in this big apparatus many videos that kind of are all the same story that is moving in different ways, infinitesimally, really the theory of the many universes. So you can stand in front of it and have a sense of many universes at the same time. It's quite powerful, and even though it gives you only a vague sense, a fleeting sense, it really does work. And I don't know how many of you have read, I'm sure many, Flatland, that beautiful book from the 19th century, the beginning of the 19th century, that talks about people that are monodimensional and people that are two-dimensional, and the two-dimensional people cannot lift themselves from the plane where they live, therefore they cannot catch the third dimension. And that gives you a sense of how the only problem that we have with the 11 dimensions, is that we cannot raise ourselves from our three-dimensional world. So it really is a wonderful way to give us an intuition of something that we could otherwise never grasp. Some designers, once again, work with scientists in powerful ways, and this is Revital Cohen, the same designer that had done the Scratcher computer machine. she's working on many different projects, but in this case, she's working with scientists that are studying the ghost limb syndrome. You know, ghost limb syndrome is something that happens when you lose a limb. You keep on feeling the limb and actually feeling pain. It's really painful, and apparently it is really disruptive of one's life, even more than losing the limb itself. And it's usually cured with a form of psychophysical therapy with mirrors, so as to let the person lose completely the sense of the limb. But there are some neuroscientists that argue that instead, that feeling should be harnessed in order to attach new types of prostheses that attach to nervous terminations that would be stimulated by this alternative therapy. So even though it's not completely a scientific experiment, Revital has developed some tests and some experiments together with scientists. You know, and scientists love to work with designers because when they do, they're not subject to the strict scrutiny of a scientific experiment. Within the confines of safety and of morality, they can take some liberties because they will not have to replicate the experiment. They can study the behavioral changes that could happen. So it's collaborations that you see a lot, especially the Royal College of Art in London with the Imperial College. You know, they're very close by and they collaborate a lot. But first and foremost, design is always about other human beings. And we've seen in the past few decades also, especially since Victor Papanek wrote the book called Design for the Real World in the early 1970s, we've seen more and more designers getting really passionate about trying to help people in difficulties, whether these people are in difficulty because they're poor, because they are in a difficult political situation, or very simply because they are either obese or diabetic, you name it. It's about really helping in a more overt way. There are many ways to define this kind of design, and all of them are not satisfactory. You know, like humanitarian design, what does it mean? But let's for a moment forget that and just think of the contents of it. It's interesting how very often it stems from one's experience. You might have heard about the Minecafon. It was even on CNN. It's been really publicized. It's on Kickstarter. It's a beautiful work by Masoud Hassani, who is a young designer that has trained in Eindhoven in the Netherlands, but he comes from Afghanistan. And he grew up in an area of North Afghanistan that was really a war zone. And when he was playing as a child with his friends, they would make these really light rolling objects that could be powered by the wind. They usually made them out of paper, and they would see which one would go faster. But sometimes these objects would go into minefields, and they couldn't go and retrieve them. So 27 years later, no, 27, he's 28 right now. He probably was 5 when he was playing with these objects. But his mother smuggled him outside of Afghanistan. He ended up in the Netherlands. He studied at the Eindhoven Academy. And for his thesis project, he decided to go back to his childhood experiences. And he decided to make a wind-powered object that would make those mines explode. So it would not only be about losing the object, it would be about the object solving a gigantic problem that is prevalent all over the world. And you know, this object is just heavy enough as to make the mine explode, but at the same time, it's light enough that it can be powered by the wind. It's a little too heavy still, and he's working on it. But what you can notice also is that the sticks are made of bamboo, which can be found pretty easily all over the world, doesn't cost much, grows very fast, so it's sustainable. And the whole manufacturing process is supposed to be replicated very easily all over the world for very little money. It's just a matter of scaling it so that the costs come down. But the idea that a designer can dig into his own experience to solve a really important problem is something that is at the basis of many good and bad deeds and many mistakes. I want now to talk about, for a moment, Project H. Project H is a couple, great people that live in Half Moon Bay in San Francisco. Very idealistic. They just came out of school and they started working. You know, they wanted to really help the world, and so they decided to work on the Hippo Roller. The Hippo Roller is like one of the flag projects of humanitarian design. It's a new way to transport water in Africa. You know, usually it's women and kids that transport the water from the water stream to the village, and to enable them to transport more every day. It was developed by two South African engineers in the 1970s. It's not perfect, but it works. It can be manufactured all over Africa. It's become ubiquitous. But Emily and her husband decided that it was not well designed, that it could be designed better. It could be done in such a way that the mold could make two parts, and then they could fit together better, and then they could be shipped in a more efficient way. It was all perfect, but it didn't take into account local realities. Some manufacturers did not want to change the molds. The molds had been made by families a long time ago. The shipping companies were already used to that particular way of doing things. It was a complete disaster because the good intentions were not matched by a reality check. So Emily and, I don't remember, I think it's Matt, it's so bad that I don't remember her husband's name, they decided to learn from that lesson and to go instead completely local. Not do anymore this distance design, this remote design, but rather they moved to North Carolina, to one of the poorest counties in the United States. They lived there for 1 year, and with the students in the high school and some people in the community, they tried to use design to improve the community. And at the end of the year, they created a new stand for the farmers market and a new wonderful chicken coop. And by really responding to what was needed there and then, and using their learned lessons of good design, they were able to make a difference not only by creating these two objects, but also by giving a sense of dignity and possibility to the community. And that's really when design can change the world, if you wish, or a community. I never like it when people say they want to change the world, but if you start responsibly, one step at a time, and you give other people the tools, that's when things can really change. And so much of design today is about starting a spark and letting the fire, I shouldn't talk about this in Colorado, but you understand what I mean, and letting it really disseminate. This was the Wonder Water Cafe at the Beijing Design Week a few years ago, in which the menu carried information about not only the calories like we do in New York City, but also the water footprint. Being aware of how much water and how much carbon dioxide we generate and how much water we use is something that is really important, and that more and more people want to make happen. You know, we have a general a council, like a special group of designers that are around the World Economic Forum, and at some point we wanted to do as a special project an international index, a symbol about carbon footprint and water footprint that you could affix to any product in the world. It would be fantastic. It turned out to be impossible because we started talking with the regulators of different countries, so making them talk to each other would be impossible, and so would the enforcement of this symbol. But truly, some designers are trying to find ways to subtly let people understand the implications of our actions and of what we do without ruining our day, but making us more conscious. Another way to be responsible is completely different. It's not about telling people what not to do, but it's about telling people what they can do. And I really like the work of these two designers. The group is called Forma Fantasma, and they're two wonderful Italian boys. They're not boys anymore, they're really men. One is Sicilian and one is Sardinian. And they often look at the craftsmanship and artisanate of the place where they're from to get ideas for today's sustainable design. What you're looking at here, this vessel and those little segments, are made using old recipes for natural resins. You know, resins are, you know, like fiberglass. They're just something slurry and creamy that hardens, and then some fibers that provide it with more resistance, right? That's all. So you can use honeybees, wax, and straw for all that matters. And they worked in collaboration with a special resin center that exists in southern Italy to recuperate old recipes, not for food this time, but for resin. And it was really fun to see them at the Salone, this big design fair that happens in Milan every year, cooking in front of everybody, cooking their resins. You know? So there's other ways to dig into material culture and to really learn from your own culture in order to be more sustainable. Because you know what? Our great parents used to not waste any part of the animal, and that's where we have to go back to go forward. Sensitivity to one's past, to one's present, and towards other people's future is also quite important. And design is trying to really be sensitive to human needs, sometimes in a really funny way. What you see on the left-hand side is this dating service that is supposed to be based only on smelling each other. So you see there's a wall between the two people. And you know, when I introduced this in a particular exhibition that I was doing, I was really amazed to find out that something like that existed in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Well, I shouldn't be surprised, I guess, but it's really quite interesting. Recuperating the senses, especially olfact, is something that many designers are obsessed with. On the right-hand side, you see the work of Emiliana Design. There are two designers from Barcelona that I really love. It's kind of facetious, and like much Spanish design or Spanish film, it's really overtly sensual in a very funny, ironic way. So you see chocolate nipples, of course, but this is my favorite. They're candies that you're supposed to put in between your toes so that your lover can suck them away. So it's really like these beautiful small objects that are meant to almost be a pointillist reaction to the pervasiveness of the digital world for those who need that reaction. I also like how designers look to other ancient rituals and human needs. For instance, how they look at death. I was telling you before about the Eindhoven Academy of Design, and that's where the mine detonator came from. In 2006, the students organized, led by Lee Edelcourt, who was the director of the Academy at that time, organized this wonderful exhibition about death. It's about design and death. So all the students worked on different aspects. There was one student did this beautiful tapestry that was all based on a pattern inspired by the HIV virus. Another student diagrammed in an amazing illustration, comics, her own history with cancer, and she couldn't be at the thesis project presentation because she died beforehand. So it was just amazing. Another one designed a banquet, a funerary banquet. It was the first time that I remember seeing such an honest application of design to not only death, but death and mourning, all of the different aspects. And I found it so powerful that I started looking for other projects, and some of them are really quite creepy. This is also coming from the Eindhoven Academy, and it has to do with spontaneous abortions or non-spontaneous, but she presented it as spontaneous. In the Netherlands, if an abortion happens before the 24th week, the fetus, the aborted fetus, is not considered a human, so a real funeral does not happen. But some parents still want to have a real ritual. They need closing. So these are small biodegradable coffins that are sized for the different weeks. It's at the same time horrible and poetic if you listen to the designer explaining it. And this project comes from an even earlier moment, and it's called Digital Remains. The idea is when you pass today, you don't leave behind only your clothes, your cars, your money, if you have it. You also leave behind all of your music, all of your images, all of your emails. You know, a few months ago, there was that whole idea of the fact that you have to make testament also about whom to leave your emails to, right? So this came a few years ago, but the idea was that if you had enough time to clean up everything, you could prepare all of your digital remains and then store them in this beautifully crafted hard drive, which is a digital urn in a way. And after you're gone, your loved ones can put this object next to their computer, and by Bluetooth connection, your desktop appears, so you're there in digital presence. It's something that is at the same time sad and also beautiful, because technology has to be something normal. It has to be incorporated in our life without stress as much as possible, and with a sense of foreboding and possibility. So sensibility is also very important. I am now turning to the fact that we're learning so much. I was telling you before how our great-grandfathers did not waste any part of the animal, and so the same happens in countries that cannot waste any part of the animal. And this is Maya Pedal, a great company that was started by an American together with people from Guatemala, and it's now based in Guatemala. They make agricultural equipment or, you know, like heavy equipment using recycled parts of bicycles. So it's all human-powered, and it's for parts of Guatemala that don't have electricity easily available. And it's a big company that is completely sustainable and completely sustaining of its community. It's something really to be learned. Another great example of sensible design is this earthquake-proof table, which we just acquired in the MoMA collection. So it's for children in schools. It's designed in Israel. And it's just redesigned so that when you throw 500 kilos or even a ton on it, you see it doesn't completely crush. So the idea is that when an earthquake happens, these school desks could become really shelters when debris or entire buildings fall on the children. You remember what happened in China 3 years ago. In a way, this would be a way to save at least some of the children there. And it's really quite amazing because so many designers are not working on flashy, fancy products. So many designers are working on all this. And they're creating a new ecosystem and a new economy that is all about new types of design. Some of them have to become entrepreneurs because there's no system in place yet for them to survive, but their pragmatism can certainly help them. And sometimes systems can be invented. This is a designer responding to a system, pre-existing system. I don't know how many of you saw The Gatekeepers last night in this same auditorium, like an amazing documentary about Shin Bet and about Israel. This is my friend Ezri Tarazi, who is a designer in Israel and who was commissioned by the government of Israel to design gas masks for newborn babies, toddlers, infants, and kids. You know, so how do you let people continue their life if they have to wear their masks for like half a day? So he was tasked with this amazing idea of having to really think up how to make them live normally with this kind of situation. And last but not least is this beautiful example in Chile, from Chile. It's Elemental. It's an architectural office. We're used to thinking of architects as big egos that want their ideas to happen, but even architects are giving in to the power of today's sense of responsibility and today's imagination. And in this case, they're building three-dimensional canvas that people will then change and adapt at their whim. In Chile, there's a beautiful system by which everybody gets a once-in-a-lifetime subsidy by the states to buy a house. It's this kind of social capitalism. And this subsidy is enough to buy this kind of 2 floors cube that is already arranged along a cul-de-sac, so it already is the beginning of a community. And Elemental decided to really focus on this particular way to do architecture. So you see, now this slide might have even more meaning for you. You've seen all these different examples that are really departures from our old idea of design. It's going to take a while for the world to be changed completely, and there's no need for it to change right away. But I think that we need to start burning chairs in order to get to a form of design that is maybe more immaterial, but that is certainly much more incisive. Thank you very much. Now, if you want to bring up the lights, we have time. I wanted to save time for a few questions if you have them. Yes, there's a gentleman with the orange shirt here. The microphone is coming. Thank you.
In your discussion, you talked primarily about designers in what we call the West, even though there's a design history.
I'm sorry, say it again. I can hear you well.
Most of what you've discussed relates to design principles that I might consider from Western society, even though there's a strong design philosophy in China and Japan and other parts of the world. Are the principles you're describing transferable to other societies which don't necessarily share our intellectual foundations? And what have you learned from those societies?
Thank you for bringing that up. It's really interesting. There are many, many, many of these projects that you've seen. I didn't put all the names that are designed by designers from Asia for sure, and also some from Africa. The geography of design has changed tremendously. So you're right, culture is the same in different parts of the world, but now designers are much more mobile. So the poles right now of the geography are the schools more than the cities. You know? So RCA, for instance, the Royal College of Art, attracts designers from all over the world, that then some stay in London, some go back to their countries, and they're not necessarily Commonwealth countries. It's really quite worldwide. The same happens with Eindhoven. And what is amazing about that, this kind of movement, is that designers bring with them their material culture. So the schools really become this very diverse crowd. However, there's still a problem of financial accessibility. And it's interesting, I was discussing it this morning with another designer. How do you make sure that you create the spark, the same spark that Project H made happen in North Carolina? How can you make it happen elsewhere? And this will take a while because it takes money, it takes visibility. Design is not considered by most a kind of real engine for progress. Many people think of design as something superfluous that should be in like a decorating section of most newspapers, and it still is. So we're changing the idea of design, we're changing the way people think about it, and then many schools and many designers are trying to actually go elsewhere, to go to places that are not normally covered, both to learn and to help. Thank you. There's over there.
Assuming that there's some value in design that's 100% aesthetically driven, something that comes to my mind is that the classic red-blue chair designed by Gerrit Rietveld in 1918, or some of the stuff Raymond Loewy did in the 30s and the 40s. If you go to very strict parameters of functional, mission, conscious-driven green design, do you eliminate that population of thinking? Is there a risk of that?
No, first, not at all. First of all, Rietveld's chair was not purely aesthetically driven. They wanted to really change the perception of art and spatial.
I own that chair. The chair is totally non-functional.
Yeah, no, I understand. It was a manifesto. Sometimes there are objects that don't have any function, but have as a function that of kind of creating an elbow on the road, you know, and kind of steer the attention away. So I think we should never only see things in black and white. There are some objects that are purely speculative or aesthetic, but still are part of the whole metabolism of what we do. So, and also, I think it's very important, at least for me, maybe because I work in an art museum and I'm proud to work there, and also because I think that beauty is everybody's right. I think it's important to hold designers to a certain standard of excellence that is both functional but also formal. So I don't think that that being responsible towards other people or doing something useful and meaningful is an abdication of aesthetic responsibility at all. Beauty is everybody's right, and beautiful objects should not cost more than ugly ones.
No, but can they be beautiful just for the sake of being beautiful?
Yeah, it depends on what they want to say. You know, to be beautiful for the sake of being beautiful, it depends on what they are. I think that when they are objects, you know, there's this strange thing called art design or design art, which is the kind of design that is sold in most cases by art galleries. And in some cases, those particular objects are examples of technological experimentation, and they are really powerful, and they're completely worthwhile. Other times, they're formal exercises that don't really concern me. But as far as I'm concerned, the way to judge objects is, do they occupy a good space on Earth? Or are they just a waste? But it's very personal, so no. I think one over there.
I'm just wondering if you could comment with regards to the socially responsible design, ecologically responsible design. Do you see any trends within the design world returning to the types of things that Buckminster Fuller was calling for with regards to designers being comprehensive and anticipatory and incorporating science? Do you see that as sort of increasing once again in terms of designers realizing their responsibility?
Oh yeah, and it's funny, you know, the 1950s were very similar to where we are today. Like the 1950s were very powerful because after the war, all the technology that had been developed for the war effort became available. So such examples as the case study houses in California, I mean, so much comes from that amazing influx of hope and technology and materials. Right now, well, you could say that the end of the Cold War did something, but there's much more permeability. There's not gigantic wars that are happening like that. There are many wars, and the effort and the technology transfer is happening more seamlessly. But I think it's a great moment for design in its capability to absorb from other disciplines. So absolutely, I think that at all times in history, there's always been some people that tried to bring us back to a sense of responsibility. Maybe only the 80s where nothing happened, but, you know, but otherwise, pretty much all the time. And this is a moment where that voice is really strong, and so is the scientific and technological voice. Do we have time for another? We're done? Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming. Really appreciate it. Thank you.